All right, Cheryl, another season has come and gone for the Maple Leafs, and it ends in very familiar fashion, losing in Game 7 to the Florida Panthers. But it felt a little bit different with the way that the Leafs performed, the way that the fans were reacting, and I don't think the fans are going to react overly positively to the way that some of the players spoke after the game, and most importantly, their captain, Auston Matthews, who described the team's effort as having, quote, too many passengers. Too many passengers, Cheryl. What do you make of it? Who do you think he's talking about?
Well, first of all, Hayes, it's eerily similar in the years past, but as you said, it's very, very different. When you talk about passengers, the first question I have is, how do you have passengers in a Game 7? And that's exactly what they looked like. They looked paralyzed. And what I mean by that is they weren't moving, they were hesitant, they were static, and they allowed the Florida Panthers to take it to them without a response. So who are those passengers? I would like to believe that Auston Matthews is going to direct the thumb first at himself before he points the finger at anybody else. And that's leadership. But when you look up and down the lineup, yeah, you're going to go to the top players on this team, because whenever you need a win, you need a big win. You need game play, gamer style play. The difference between being good and great, you need your top players to perform, and they just didn't perform in this game. Whether it's Mitch Marner, whether it's Auston Matthews, I'm going to look at those two directly. And you look at, Mitch Marner in particular, who's taken a ton of heat. Well, Auston Matthews didn't score the big goal outside of Game 6. And you look at the numbers for both of these guys, you look at the numbers up and down the lineup. I mean, the differentials are terrible, Hayes. You look at the greats in the game. You look at, the Nate McKinnons. You look at the Dreisaitl's, the Sidney Crosbys. You can even go back and say the Gretzkys. And you look at their performances in those games. And you can see their game elevate because they want to seize the opportunity. And it is difficult to win. No one is saying it ain't difficult to win. But you have to be connected up and down the lineup. And you got to find a way to have everyone buying in. When Lawton and Lorentz are getting your opportunities, that is great. But Gadjevich on the other side is also scoring. Luosterainen, Matthew Tkachuk didn't have a great series, but they found a way. This team hasn't been able to find a way. And to have passengers in a Game 7, it just ain't good enough.
Yeah, it's a terrible indictment on the team. And I think ultimately it should start with the guy who issued the quote. Auston Matthews, he's the captain, he's the leader, he's the best player. And you referenced other great players like Nathan McKinnon, like Connor McDavid, guys of that ilk, which is the status that Auston Matthews is trying to reach. He has caught them in some areas during the regular season. He's nowhere close in terms of his playoff performance. And the greatest players have to show up in the biggest moments. And the biggest moment is Game 7 of the second round against the Stanley Cup champs. And Auston Matthews didn't do it. And this sounds too much like he's passing the buck, right? Too many passengers. Start with yourself. Auston wasn't good enough last night. Mitch Marner wasn't good enough last night. You mentioned Steven Lorentz played fine. Scott Laughton was fine. Max Domi played well. The guys further down the lineup, the quote-unquote supporting cast, I don't think they were passengers. I think this is about their best players being passengers, and yet Auston Matthews didn't talk about himself. He didn't show that emotion. He wasn't the one that was willing to show up when they needed to stop the bleeding, because that's really what happened last night. Florida came out flying the first 10 minutes, and the Leafs looked shell-shocked, but they got it back together. They played very well in the second half of the first period. They get into the first intermission, and then what happened was Seth Jones scored, and that's when your leadership had to show up and say, not today, boys. We're not going to allow the bleeding to continue. That's when Matthews had to have a great shift. He didn't. That's when Marner had to have a great shift. He didn't. Tavares and Nylander. So I think, Cheryl, you can look at the very specific outcome of how this game played out after the Panthers got on the board first. Because instead of it going from 1-0 Florida to 1-1, you blinked and it was 3-0. And I look at the leadership there, and I think Auston Matthews in particular, first year as the captain, he's got to own a lot of this. And instead of just pointing fingers and saying passengers, Cheryl, I'm curious as to why he didn't step up and say, I'm the one that has to lead the charge, because he didn't do it on the ice, and he certainly didn't say it afterwards.
Well, yeah, and there's something that bothers me as well, and we can go back earlier in the series. And you talk about Seth Jones, and how about Brad Marchand, right? Finding a way to get it done. And there's an intensity that goes along with that. So if I go back to Game 3, They have a stranglehold on the series. And we can talk matchups. Throw those out the door. I don't want to hear about matchups. Yes, Barkov is absolutely amazing, but you think that, Connor McDavid doesn't have matchups every single night. The best in the game find a way. And that's why they're the best in the game. You can go from good or you can go to great. And the difference is in those big games. So I go back to game 3. They have a stranglehold on the series. They come out flying in the first 10 minutes. And that's where we can see, wow, like this team is firing on all cylinders. This team is different. And that is why they have expectation, right? They have that expectation because they do have this particular lineup. But they didn't step on the jugular. They gave the Florida Panthers, they gave Bobrovsky, who hadn't been playing well to that point in the series, they gave them a lifeline. And if you give the Cup champs a lifeline, they're going to take it. And boy, did they ever take it. Game 5 was a primetime example. You thought you wouldn't see it again. And when I say paralysis, that's exactly what I mean in Game 7. It's almost as if they were afraid to lose. And I'm wondering why, when you're at home, that you don't finally say, screw it. Like, we're just going to go play. Go play, go lead, and go drive the bus. And the top players didn't drive the bus, and it's sort of the way in which they lost. I think, when you lose to the Florida Panthers, you can all be talking about, okay, they lost to a great team. No question about it. It's not easy to win. No one is saying it's easy to win, or you're even going to get to the conference final playing the Florida Panthers. But what you showed at the beginning of the series, and then the fight at the end, that's the difficulty, because no one can figure out the in-between, the big old why is this continually happening to the Toronto Maple Leafs.
It's very hyper-focused, right? They win a lot of regular season games 1 through 6 in the playoffs. They've had a lot of ups, some downs. It's game 7 in particular. When the brights are the lightest, or when the lights are the brightest, this team just has not found a way to get it done. Another season goes down the drain for the core 4 in the Maple Leafs.